of innovation for your mind, soul, and heart. Connect, act, and recharge with Remo Daily. This is Remo Daily.
Wow. As Sarah puts it in the chat, I don't know what I love more, the music or all the smiles here. Thank you so very much. It's time to click or swipe back to speaker view because here he is. Welcome, our guest, award-winning journalist and author of 14 Miles, DW Gibson. Welcome to Remote Daily, DW.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from, and how do you feel? How's your inner DW today?
I am joining you from Kailua, Hawaii, where I've been quarantining. I was teaching here at the university, and here comes a pandemic, and here I am. But I'm grateful to be in this beautiful place. And yeah, I'm feeling good today. I'm feeling better than I was 10 minutes ago with what we've done so far. So I'm grateful.
Wonderful. And I'm glad that, you know, across all this distance, you're here with us from the wonderful islands of Hawaii. What a Zoom guest. Thank you. And thank you also for taking the time early in your morning. When we first met, when you published The Edge Becomes the Center, your book about gentrification in Brooklyn, where you usually reside, if I'm correct, you spent months walking around neighborhoods, talking to people. You unearthed a lot of invisible borders, gentrification, money, power. And now you followed a stretch of 14 miles out of the planned, I think, 2,000 miles of Trump's border wall along the US-Mexico border. This colorful and very flexible line that has been redefined many times throughout history. Your book just came out, I think 2 weeks ago, has since been celebrated by many, among them the New York Times Book Review. Congratulations on that, on this amazing achievement. And I have to ask you first, like, why in the world did you spend 2 years investigating, traveling, exploring this non-place, this cruel place, this eerie place between these two countries?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned The Edge Becomes the Center, because I feel like that was the point of origin for me. So I spent time in New York City talking to people about how the city was changing with a bunch of money coming to town. And something that came up again and again in the conversations I had with tenants and landlords and bankers was the idea of borders, sometimes in a literal way, sometimes in a more figurative way. But even if it was talking about, oh, I only go to this part of town, or I always stay on these streets, right? Or that idea, that cliche we have of the wrong side of the tracks, right? And so it got me thinking about how we use those lines in our lives, and even more figurative lines, right? Like, I only speak this language, or I only hang out with these kinds of people, right? So those lines we use that are sometimes literal, sometimes figurative, that define us. And my wheels got turning about that, and how that looks if you telescope it out. And that naturally led to sort of the idea of national borders and how those play a part. And of course, this has been such a big part of our cultural and political discussion for years now. And so I wanted to go there and see how the border really functions in the real world when it's compared to how it looks in our imagination.
And I have to get this question out of the way. You know, we all saw the prototypes of the wall in the news. I think there's only, you described this in your book, like 3 miles of actual wall at this point. Do you think this wall will actually exist one day, like in the way as, a certain man dreamed it up?
Yeah, I mean, so many, good questions sort of baked in there. So for starters, the U.S.-Mexico border is 1,954 miles long, covers every possible terrain, rivers and mountains and deserts and beach. And there are approximately 800 of those miles have some kind of barrier already there. Now, the important thing is to understand is that most of that was there before the president took office. He's done a lot of construction on the southern border, but all but 3 miles of it has been replacement fencing for for fencing that was already in place. So that's an important point. That said, just because it's replacement fencing, it is important to note that the replacement fencing is much more expansive and taller and has required the destruction of much more of the natural world. So some of you might have seen images coming out of Arizona in recent weeks of some of the 1,000-year-old cacti that have been just torn down in a moment for the erection of the bigger fence that they're putting up now. So still destruction going, even though it's replacement fencing. And I want to point out too that I really hug this word closely, fencing. The idea of the wall, I think it's really important. The idea of one wall that's nearly 2,000 miles continuous has always been a myth. And never a reality. I saw a lot of barriers at the southern border, a lot of different materials used, steel ballards, concertina wire, but I never saw anything that actually resembled a wall. And I think that word really taps into the myth that the president was trying to tap into.
A myth. And this is a first on Remote Daily, and I'm glad you agreed. I would ask you, so we get a sense of how you take us on this journey, to read the opening of 14 miles to us, and Dario has agreed to support your voice with his art. So here you go, the mic is yours, DW.
Yeah, I'll just read the first 2 pages of the first chapter. Life for the 3.3 million people who live in San Diego County is in large part defined by one's travel patterns. A complex of freeways and interchanges carve up the landscape. I've experienced several 2-mile journeys that involved 3 freeways. There's the 5, the 54, the 805. These numbers contribute to each person's identity, establishing patterns that relay something about income brackets and lifestyle. They facilitate relationships and intensify alienation. This persists in the eastern part of the county, where crosswalks give way to cattle gates, but locals still orient using highway numbers, Old 80, Route 94. Even those who use public transportation can't avoid this dynamic. Buses use the slow lanes, and many of San Diego's signature red trolleys run parallel to the freeways. The sound of sweet, soft bells is enough to terrify any driver within earshot who realizes a trolley is about to temporarily block an intersection or a freeway on-ramp. I grew up in the region and don't remember hearing adults reference north and south, east or west. Giving directions always sounded more like out toward the 15 or head over to the 73. When I was 8, I had no idea how to use a compass, but I could tell you which freeways led to the beach, the mall, church, any integral part of my life. Now I'm reacquainting myself with the roads after 2 decades away. I'm letting the wall determine my travel patterns. I've been searching for a way to figure out what a border really looks like in an increasingly interconnected world. I'm hopeful the prototypes will help me get to the bottom of this. And not just the construction itself, the crews and the 50,000-pound concrete panels, but the people living and working and crossing the border in the same county where construction is happening, the same county where every day 70,000 vehicles and 20,000 pedestrians use the San Isidro border crossing, the busiest in the Western Hemisphere. I want to know how the reality of the region comports or doesn't with all the ideas and expectations we form when viewing the border as a clean line on a map. So far, I have discovered that clean lines generally mark the most complicated places. None more so than the 8 freeway. Everyone in San Diego County is familiar with it, either by reputation or commute. It runs from the ocean to desert, parallel to the line dividing Mexico and the US, and it may be 15 miles to the north, but I have become convinced it is the real border. Not because the residents of the South Bay are any less American than the locals in Del Mar or Encinitas to the north of the freeway, but they are not generally incorporated into the county or the state or the country in the same way. The roads in Nestor do not look like the roads in Torrey Pines. Neither do the public schools or job markets or emergency services. And there is a broader disconnect between those who live north of the 8 and those who are south. For many people north of the freeway, going south means tacos at El Gordo or surfing the sloughs at Imperial Beach. Special trips to special places outside the quotidian. Otherwise, the band of land between the 8th and the international line has historically functioned more like a US-controlled buffer zone between the two countries. Congress allocated $20 million for the prototypes to go up south of the 8 freeway, but the federal government hasn't finished perusing all the bids for the job. The process was supposed to move faster. It is August of 2017, and the Department of Homeland Security originally scheduled contracts to be awarded 2 months ago by June 14th, with construction to start, quote, 8 days later. Those dates passed without so much as a cement mixer showing up. The revised timeline is increasingly unrealistic, completion by next month. There is no barricade on Enrique Ferme Road yet, no fencing around the construction site. The rocky drive across the desert is ill-advised in my budget rental, but still I risk it regularly, parking near the spot where the secondary fence comes to a sudden end and the empty staging area begins. I sip coffee and wait for action. When I get tired of the quiet and the stillness, I work on a list of all the things I've ever seen or read about borders and walls, every song and image, every history, lesson, story, and myth. 2 memories from my childhood. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, vintage episode. King Friday builds a wall to fortify his castle. Memorizing Robert Frost's Mending Wall in the 6th grade. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this powerful introduction while sitting in front of this beautiful shelf in Hawaii. What a place to be stuck at. And thank you for sharing this with us. And also thanks to Dario. This was the first remote daily, and I hope it was a powerful experience for all of you, just like it was for me. DW, while you take a sip of water, I will fire up the screen share because you brought along a few pictures from your journey, and I'll share them for all of us so that you can take us into your book, into this journey, and gift us with just a few short stories. Your book is not written in a way that it, you know, tries to be smart about borders or pulls together like annuals of research. You are the master of oral history, of connecting with people and weaving their stories and the things they say to you in a bar or out there on the field together. And that is what I hope for, you know, just a few minutes to get an impression of. Can you see the screen share?
Yeah.
So please, DW, take us on this journey and share with us a few short stories or reflections of life in the shadow of the border wall.
Right. So this is one of the murals in Chicano Park. And so I was just reading about the 8 freeway. Chicano Park is in the neighborhood of Barrio Logan in San Diego. And the 8 freeway is right there. Barrio Logan, for the better part of the 20th century, big Mexican community. A lot of people came over after the Mexican Revolution in the early part of the 20th century. So generations there, very industrial. And that neighborhood has been, you know, this is what happens when a neighborhood gets left behind, right? So it's sort of in the middle of more affluent neighborhoods. And they've built so much. They built a freeway right through the neighborhood. They built this bridge, the Coronado Island, right over the neighborhood. That's what these pillars are right here. They built factories throughout the neighborhood. And the people who live there have been putting up with this industrialization for generations. And they wanted a park. They wanted a place. They wanted something green. And they had to really fight for that space. This man is named Manuel. And I have a picture of him and his friend as well. They're 2 gentlemen who own the land right up against the border, just across from the prototypes, the 8 prototypes they built in the desert. And they plant tons of trees on their property there. And they're so in tune to the land and what it wants. An artist, I went with them to visit them with an artist who wanted to talk to them about planting a tree right on the border. And we just sort of popped up out of the blue, and these guys heard that artist give that idea, and they're like, sure, let's plant a tree right on the border. Really kind of remarkable individuals, and their relationship to the land and to borders really taught me quite a bit. Let's see what we have here. And this is one of the most striking images. Some of you might have seen it before. This is where the border ends or begins. Hard to say, right? That's the Pacific Ocean. This is a bluff in a small pavilion known as Friendship Park. They're actually, so these are steel ballards going into the Pacific Ocean. And this is the design of the wall, is a variation of it that's being used right now in a lot of places. But at Friendship Park, you can go up on the weekends and actually talk to people on the south side of the border. You can't touch each other. There's wire mesh that makes it too hard to touch each other, but you can stick your pinky through the wire mesh and sort of touch pinky to pinky. They call them pinky kisses at Friendship Park, and there are church services that go on there regularly. It's a really special place, and Border Patrol is often pushing back on giving access to it, and people are often pushing to gain more access to it. But it's one of the few places along the border where people can interact in real time on either side. And this is an image I saw out in the desert. You see this a lot. This is one of the older fences that you see, the corrugated metal. Those are actually old landing mats from aircraft carriers. And that's the oldest iteration of the border fence on the Mexican-US border. And you see here the clothing, right, caught up in the concertina wire. This is from folks hopping over. A lot of times, sometimes people lose bits of clothing as it gets caught and they just sort of abandon. But oftentimes with the bigger coats and things like that, they'll throw them over the wire to give them protection from the sharp razors on the wire. This is a gentleman named Jonathan Yost who works for a group called Border Angels. I went out with him into the desert. We hiked up into a canyon. Jonathan and Border Angels, they work to drop water in the desert for migrants that are crossing. I really discovered that fences at the border, they never stop anything. They only divert traffic. When they put up a lot of fencing in the city center in San Diego and Tijuana, really what it did is it just drove all of the traffic out to the desert and became more dangerous for the migrants to cross. So organizations like Border Angels started going out there regularly to drop water. This is near the spot where I drop water. It was a fence that was put up by some private citizens. You know, there are a lot of private citizen efforts to guard the border. Minutemen, you might have heard of the Minutemen. This was a fence that was put up in the early 2000s. It was paid for by money of Americans that you know, wanted to see the fence put up. It was a really small fence. You can see there, it's just sort of chicken wire with posts. But the people who paid for the fence got to have placards put on the fence and decide what was written on their placards. And this is what someone decided to write on the placard they wanted to be put on the fence. They simply wrote the phrase, drop dead, which is sort of mind-boggling and disturbing.
And Sarah just asked if the government has been prosecuting the Border Angels?
No, so there's all kinds of issues that the Border Angels run into. The border agents and activists that are against what they do will track their movements and then go and try to slash the water or shoot it before it can be discovered. So they don't get in trouble for doing what they're doing. They're staying on the US side. At least Jonathan Yost and the Border Angels. There have been some other cases where some other activists have taken other actions in terms of giving migrants rides and so forth, where they have been prosecuted. But Jonathan hasn't been prosecuted for leaving water. They just have to be more strategic about where they put it. And there's a very specific way they place the water, trying to make sure that Border Patrol can't discover it before migrants. And they also shut off all GPS when going out on a hike so that they can't be tracked. Nobody makes any postings over social media while we're out there. That image, if we could go back to really quickly, it's quite interesting. It just sort of is a great reminder of the surveillance state that exists at the border. You know, you have this old corrugated fence, but that big shiny post up there with a host of cameras getting a 360-degree view of the area. That's a big factor for people who live by the border and have that feeling that they're being watched all the time, even in their private lives. And this is just a good example of sort of the atmosphere. This is right across from the prototypes. You can see two of the prototypes sticking out there over the corrugated metal. There were 8 prototypes of the border wall that were built side by side, lined up like beauty pageant contestants. In the end, none of them have been used to build more fencing. It was really sort of a pointless exercise in the end. And the citizens in this colonial, on the south side of the border, it's Las Torres, a neighborhood of Tijuana called Las Torres, a very working class neighborhood. And oftentimes residents will set up tires and chairs like this so they can peek over and look to see what's happening. People also use those tires to make it easier to hop over. this is a broader shot of the same area. You see a lot of activity at the border. Sometimes you see burned out cars, and they tell their own story. But just to the left of that image there's a bunch of lean-to homes and plywood homes where people live, again, subsisting on the daily income, recycling. A lot of people recycle. A lot of people work in the maquiladoras, the factories there in Mexico where American products are made. And this is when they were testing the prototypes. So they build them in October of 2017, and then they spend several months testing them, rappelling up and down them to see how difficult they were to climb, puncturing them with all kinds of power tools, trying to dig under them. I said walls never stop traffic, they only divert. All the prototypes had footing that went 6 feet into the ground, but I talked to a gentleman from the tunnel division of Border Patrol in San Diego, and he's found tunnels 90 feet into the ground. So just that simple fact all by itself demonstrates that that the fences will not stop any traffic, only divert the traffic. And
what also struck me was your encounter with contractors building were actually conflicted with what they do, and you see how complicated life is and economy is in this area.
Yeah, I spoke to a lot of contractors who submitted bids to build the walls, and they're human beings with a lot of conflicted emotion about it. This is an image from the caravan. So I spent time with one of the caravans, or the groups that become known as the caravans. It's actually the Via Crucis, a traditional march through Mexico, religious march. But so they arrived in the spring of 2018 to the port of San Isidro, about 150, 200 people. They were camped out there waiting to enter the U.S. to apply for asylum. It's very important to understand that under international law and U.S. law, everyone has the right to apply for asylum. These people were being kept out of the country in violation of U.S. law and violation of U.S. law to apply for asylum. Not be granted asylum, but simply have their case heard. So they had congregated out there. The mood changed over days, but after a time, you see a young man there that went to bring card tricks to entertain some of the kids. People showed up with chalk and other art activities for the kids that were in the caravan. It was largely families, lots of kids, some very young kids, lots of mothers, some working age men, but lots of women and children were in
What is an organization you suggest to support that helps these people?
There are a lot. So Border Angels is good out there. I'm blanking on the name of the organization that I encountered there. Sin Fronteras. There's another word in their title that I'm sorry, that is just out of my mind right now. But I'm happy to do some research and follow up.
Britt just shared the link to the Border Angels in the chat. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. But yeah, they're and there's a wonderful lawyer named Nicole Ramos who works with Alto, a lawyer organization that does a lot of good work with immigrants there. If you even Google Nicole Ramos, her organization will come up, and they do really good work for the migrants there. There you see a young girl doing some artwork. People brought music, and really to try to present some hope to a pretty hopeless situation out there on these rainy, cloudy days. And if anyone has been in California in early spring, late winter, you know how gray and cloudy it can be. And it was hard for people sleeping out there on the concrete. They had sleeping bags and nothing else really, just tarps covering their heads.
And this is just a small part of what you encountered. What a ride for us to even look at this in a brief way. And the chat lit up here with very strong opinions, a lot of sadness and heartbreak and shock about what we just saw, and also some personal memories from that area. Your book is a meditation on borders as well. What did you learn about yourself in those 2 years that has changed your life?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned there in the reading, I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County, actually, just north of San Diego County there in the region. And, I subscribe to this, it made me realize how we teach borders, at least in an American context. And we really have an antiquated view of borders that really presents them in a one-dimensional way as dangerous, right? And I think it's tied into this sort of like cowboy mentality, this frontier mentality, our devotion to property, right? to protecting property. And so the idea is that the border is that place where we stop protecting, where we stop knowing everyone, and it's a sort of wondering what's on the other side. And I think that that's the one-dimensional way we teach borders and think about borders. Consider, I met a group called the Explorers, the Border Patrol Explorers. They're teenagers that meet on a regular basis, teenagers as young as 14, and they're taught by border agents how to become agents. And that kind of even blew my mind, you know, just thinking about grooming people that young. And the agent who was working with the teenagers, she kept using the word bandit, right? And even just that sort of stood out to me. Why are we saying bandit instead of even say criminal? You know, it really taps into this sort of idea of manifest destiny, this antiquated view of the border and this sense of danger. And I really came to realize that borders are, in fact, sure, there might be danger there, but danger or crime is something we deal with in society writ large, right? Every geography of society deals with crime. So why are we defining the border region by that one characteristic? The border region in a globalized world is an ecosystem of human activity. It's lives, it's jobs, it's cultures, that all of those things meeting. And when you encounter the people that are in that region, you get a sense of that really dynamic ecosystem.
Do you have a sense of what's more dangerous in terms of how humans use their power on borders, the visible or the invisible borders?
I think the invisible borders are more insidious, because consider this. I mean, so here we have a physical border, right? Or at least something we're trying to make a, physical border. Like, let's remember that the line between the US and Mexico is in fact imagined. The idea of building a fence there brings it from the imagination into the physical, tangible world, right? And somehow that gives us a sense of security. But I think that the more ephemeral a border becomes, the more figurative it becomes, the more insidious it becomes, because we don't confront it as much. Trump's efforts to build a wall, to build a barrier at the border, has, look at all of the energy it's fanned in terms of pushing back on that, right? And look at how much he's backed off of it, right? He's backed off of it in so many ways. Even though he's pushing forward the work, it isn't that centerpiece he once made it. So I think that's a very effective that's an argument for the fact that when it's a more tangible thing, we're more likely to push back on it. When it's something more ephemeral, like say, even take for instance, the idea of redlining, right? So the idea that banks for generations and even up until, parents' generation and more recent times, created maps where they would only give mortgages to Black families, and in some cases only give mortgages to white families. Those were lines that really didn't exist for most people in any tangible way, but look how insidious that is. Look at how that stops our quest to create a more equitable society. So I think that when we're not sort of smacked with them, it's harder for us to sort of see them and see them for what they are.
Thank you so much, DW. This is such a deep topic, and you give us so much food for thought here. I would like to open it at this point to all of you in the room here on Zoom. I know that at least 2 of you have a personal connection to the border. So if you would like to say something first or share something first, please just give me a show of hand if you have a question for DW, a story you would like to share, or just maybe a reflection on what you just heard. Kyoko. Hi.
Hi. So, thank you for writing this book. I'm sure that there's plenty more to write about. I wanted to ask you if, if you walked along the Texas side of the border, and what did you make of it? That's opposed to like California. Yep.
Yeah. No, so I didn't, and this is something I should have made clear from the outset. I really zeroed in on San Diego County, and when I was at the beginning of this project, I looked at every single county along the border, California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, and I was looking for the most dynamic one, the one that sort of could give me America in miniature, right? And San Diego County is a big county, and it did that. It has a big city, one of the biggest cities in the country, San Diego, but you go into the interior of the county, Eastern County, and it's ranches, and it's rural, and it's much more conservative. So, and I knew that if I tried to tackle a 2,000-mile enterprise, I would truly be overwhelmed. So I stayed in this zone of California, which presented its own dynamics. But I I absolutely realized in my conversations, I went down to talk to a migrant in Harlingen at one point for another project. And, you know, it really does show you how different the dynamics are in each place and how nuanced they are in terms of the community that's there. But it really is the California that where I focus my energy. Would love to make my next project be Texas based for sure.
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's very interesting. It's, you know, of course, a little bit more rural, but like also on a personal experience in my very first job, I used to do training, and there were several distribution depots along the border, one in Tijuana, one in Tecate, and one in Calexico. And, you know, we used to go there, and it was very interesting to see how people, you know, go to walk on the other side of the border instinctively, as if, you know, going from the Upper East Side to the Upper West Side. They just come and go.
It's a great point. I'm so glad you said that. It's important to understand that, like, you know, people have that kind of relationship to the border. It's a daily commute for some people. And I saw that in San Diego. You have people, especially with the housing crunch there, it's so expensive. The gentrification has pushed a lot of people, Americans, into Tijuana to live there. It's much cheaper. So they live there and they work in San Diego. And, you know, your focus on ports is really good. We obsess about border patrol and patrolling the wide open deserts, but so much of the activity is at ports of entry. And I mean activity in terms of people crossing, and also the crime that's interdicted. When crime is interdicted at the border, it's often interdicted at the ports of entry. So I think we would be well served to put our money and our energy into building more ports, into making them more secure places so that people can, so that crime can be found, and that so people that are just passing every day to go to work, to go to school, to see family members, can do so in a more efficient fashion. People wait, you know, people in San Diego area, I don't know how it is in Texas, but they know you can wait for 4 hours to get into the country. And
Yeah.
it can be totally disruptive to your daily life.
Yeah.
Thank
On
you
the
so
Texas
very
side,
much.
my experience was it was a little bit more rural, but still very busy. And, you know, now the other part of it that is having a strong influence on how things get done is, of course, the cartels and, you know, fighting for you know, different territories, and how that has you know, make everyone be on the tip of their toes all the time, because the same way that there's this exchange of legal business, is also like all this coming and going of illegal stuff.
And I'll just say real quick as a follow-up to that before I pass back to Felix is you know, in terms of crime at the border, two things Americans could think about in terms of the part we play in the crime at the border. One is we supply the drug market, right? If we stop buying the drugs, then there wouldn't be the drug market. And two, we supply the guns. Guns are illegal in Mexico. It's very difficult to get them, but it's very easy to go to a gun show in Texas as an undocumented migrant, in fact. Buy a bunch of guns, stick them into a refrigerator, washer, dryer, and take them down to Mexico. So if we think about how we supply the guns in the drug market, that could change the crime at the border as well.
Yeah.
Huge point here. Thank you, DW, and thank you, Kyoko, for sharing some of your personal experience. They combine in their lives, and the borders that I have crossed in my life or in my travel, they always just pointed me towards brutal colonization, to randomness, to white power. I have never seen a border that I actually liked. And we recently started land acknowledgements here on Remote Daily DW, and it's been a fascinating journey. In fact, Yvonne and Kyoko are also both part of supporting us here behind the scenes, find the right words, and, you know, diving into the land really. And I have to ask you, maybe as a final question, DW. So, of course, globalization has this concept of no borders at all, which shows its flaws now clearly during the pandemic. I have this crazy experience coming from Europe, like these kind of like ruler lines that Europeans drew on tribal land. What would you do? Big question here, but it's the last one. What would you do if you had the power to decide over the future of borders as a human concept?
I think the point of, you know, so globalization has had a lot to say about borders, right? In a way, like borders now are like about nation states trying to assert their power and not realizing how much they've already given up to globalization. And we talk about globalization, we're talking about capitalism in large part here, right? So what I observed is you have agreements, trade agreements like NAFTA, where you have that make factories in northern Mexico where American corporations capitalize on cheap labor, skip out on taxes, pollute waterways that dump out into the ocean, and then ship cheap products to American stores, right? And we love those cheap products. We gobble them up at all the stores we go to. And I think that if I could make us think about one thing or change one thing about borders, it would be to acknowledge that we hold those cheap products in such high esteem, but we don't hold the people who make them possible in high esteem. And so products flow freely past globalized borders, but people who make those products don't. And I would advocate for finding a way to let people flow as freely as products across borders. This could be done with international worker cards, more liberal visa programs, acknowledging that workers compete in a globalized market, even if they don't want to. We've been forced now to compete in a globalized market, all of us. And so I think we need to acknowledge that that's where workers have been put. And we've dealt with this lie of, oh, you can sort of, move around wherever you want, get whatever job you want in a free market. No, we're very confined. And I think that if we could find a way to empower people to move as freely as products, we'd be much better off.
Wow. Yes. Thank you and amen to that. Is there a final comment or question for DW from the community here? If so, please just show your hand. If not, I would like to thank you very much and maybe ask you for, a little last piece of advice while I'll share the link to our Slack here so that we can continue this conversation together. We just opened the book channel there. If there's one thing that you would like for us to take from your book and from today's conversation, DW, what would that be? Just as a final thought here.
Yeah. I think it's about identifying those borders in your life in terms of the street you live on, in terms of your own home, in terms of the stores you go to, the people you talk to, and the language you speak, and push past it. Pick one border, whether it's about language, whether it's about where you take your walks at night with your dog, whether it's about what part of the city you go to that you live in, and disrupt that border. Disrupt the borders in your daily life.
Disrupt the borders in your daily life, and please do it here with us and wherever you are. It starts within your own circle. DW Gibson, thank you so very much for taking the time, for bringing so many stories, for teaching us about the 14 miles that you spent 2 years on. Thank you, and applause from all of us here out there on the streams and here in the Zoom room. We thank you for spending this week with us here. On Monday, we will be hosting Andy Casagrande, an Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker. So we continue our culture journey here, and we will dive into a topic which we have not touched here on Remote Daily, which is the deep, the ocean, the dark. And Andy will share with us some lessons from the deep here on Remote Daily. So I hope to see you on Monday. And now it's the time for all of us to return to live art here on Remote Daily. Please enjoy Eleanor, Dubinsky, and Dario, Acosta, Teich with the final song of this hour and this week here on Remote Daily.
Dicen que por las noches no más se le iba en puro llorar. Dicen que no comía, no más se le iba.
You want to play?
Cómo sufría por ella, que hasta en su muerte la fue llamando. Ay, 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 ay. Cantar.
Esto fue Remote Daily. Thank you so very much, Eleanor and Dario, for everything you do here for us every day. Gets to me every time. And I want to thank our guest, DW Gibson, for joining us. I want to thank Britt, Jolie, and the amazing team here behind the scenes. And I want to thank all of you, the second family here, and Brenda, Christopher, Deborah, Sabine, Joe, Jolie, John, Kyoko, Lisa, Linda, Michelle, Rashad, Sarah, Tim, Tommy, Yvonne, and everybody else who joined us today. I'm Felix, and this was Remote Daily. I see you on Monday. Have a great and healthy weekend. Thank you, and bye-bye.